Hello there, and welcome to Autology, the podcast that brings you the latest on automotive technology. My name is Amit Pandey, and I'm your host in our special episode of Autology today. We will focus on the recently organized electric vehicle battery focused event in Seoul, InterBattery 2026. This year marked 14th edition of InterBattery, which is the flagship battery exhibition hosted by the Korean government's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy and organized by the Korea Battery Industry Association, Korea Trade and Investment Promotion Agency and other parties. InterBattery Korea is easily one of the largest battery focused events in the world. At the event, we get to see latest technologies around battery chemistry, fast charging capabilities, materials, components, manufacturing equipment, recycling, and several other pieces of the puzzle that belong to the overall battery ecosystem. Therefore, naturally, the event assumes a lot of importance as a long lasting and safe battery is central to the ongoing EV transition. The event, which was organized in the second week of March in Seoul, was attended by my colleague John in person. John is a senior research analyst for battery technologies at S&P Global Mobility, and he is stationed in Seoul. Hi, John. Thank you very much for joining today's episode of Autology.
Hello, Amit, and thanks for having me here.
My pleasure, John. So, the past year has been very difficult for the overall global adoption of battery electric vehicles. We already know that Korean battery makers in the US are already pivoting capacity to cater to the energy storage market. And to begin with, I'd first like to understand what was the general mood at the event. In fact, when I was reading a few news articles, one news article pointed out that the three CEOs, basically the CEOs of Samsung, SDI, SK On, and LG Energy Solution, they did not attend the event this year. That says a lot in itself. And that said, there was a lot of emphasis, if I may believe, on non-EV related applications. So, can you just give us a general sense on what you noticed at the event this year, John?
Yeah, that's right. In previous years, the CEOs of the three major Korean battery manufacturers would usually attend the events as part of the VIP tour, and they would also take part in the door stamping ceremony. But this year, none of the battery maker CEOs were present, but the only executive who participated in the door stamping was the CEO of POSCO Future M, who currently leads the Korean Battery Industry Association. I think that to some extent, this reflects the current downturn in the battery market. The overall industry environment simply isn't very favorable at the moment. What really stood out to me at InterBattery 2026 was how different the exhibition felt compared to previous years. Until now, it had largely felt like an Inter EV battery show. This year, though, it genuinely felt like an InterBattery show. The automotive-centric image had largely disappeared, and instead, the focus was on batteries across a much wider range of applications. It felt as though the exhibitor were saying, wherever batteries are needed, we've tried to cover it. As a result, we saw a much broader range of solutions on display, including solid-state batteries and LFP, as well as applications for robots, ESS, and even areas like air mobility.
So I think I was right. I was reading a news article which quoted Korean government's trade and industry deputy minister, or I think vice minister, that's how we call them in Korea. What he said was that Korea's battery industry's got only 5 to 7 years left to overcome the current crisis, and I understand that he's referring to a certain window. I'm really curious to understand what the government official is really referring to here, John. Can you really elaborate on this?
During the opening ceremony, the Vice Minister Moon Shin-Hak made a particularly striking comment. He said that Amid the ongoing technology rivalry between the US and China, so Korean battery companies no longer have much breathing room left. What he was essentially referring to was the fact that as the global supply chain continues to be reshaped, Korean companies have a strategic window of around 5 to 7 years. During this period, the government believes that the battery value chain and the domestic materials ecosystem need to be reorganized and strengthened in order for Korea to maintain its position as a global leader in battery competitiveness. Personally, I tend to agree with that view. I think how Korean battery companies prepare over this 5 to 7 year time frame will play a critical role in determining not just their competitiveness, but in some cases their very survival.
So basically, that's the window where the Western countries, mainly Europe and US, they're taking the time to set up their own battery ecosystem. That's the window of opportunity for Korean battery suppliers to maximize their order book as much as possible. Right. Now let's just dive deep into what the event really was about this year. Let's just focus on the highlights from each major player present at the event for our audience who are looking to take note. Can you provide a summary of key products and technologies that were displayed at InterBattery this year, John?
Yes, sure. LG Solution continues to play a leading role among Korean battery manufacturers. At this year's event, the company went well beyond electric vehicles and ESS. One notable highlight was the first public showcase of its LMR battery, which is being co-developed with General Motors. In addition, LG Solution also presented a number of distinctive technologies that you'd typically expect from a market leader, such as bipolar batteries and sodium-ion batteries. And at SK On, the focus was largely on cell design and thermal management. The company introduced an integrated prismatic cell concept where pouch cells are housed within a prismatic form factor, alongside technologies such as large surface cooling and immersion cooling. In particular, SK On unveiled its so-called on-vent prismatic cell by applying laser engraving technology. The company is able to place gas and heat vents exactly where they are needed, significantly improving design flexibility and safety. Samsung SDI, meanwhile, stood out for a very different reason. It was actually quite difficult to find strong automotive imagery at its booth. Instead, the company focused on advanced battery solutions designed to enable the AI era. A key highlight was the full lineup of its integrated ESS, the Samsung Battery Box (SBB), which was showcased specifically for ESS applications. Turning to material suppliers, companies such as POSCO, EcoPro, LGChem, and LNF placed a strong emphasis on strengthening the full value chain for critical minerals, as well as on sustainability and recycling. LGChem, in particular, stood out by going beyond cathode materials. The company also introduced engineering plastics designed to delay thermal runaway, along with an aerosol-based thermal insulation materials called Nexula, which was a particularly impressive addition to its portfolio.
Okay, those are some noteworthy developments. We are also hearing a lot about the role of AI in battery industry, and you just mentioned about how these battery makers are now focusing on AI related applications. So can you please throw some light on this?
Yes, if I were to sum up the overall theme of this year's exhibition, I'd describe it as battery for AI and AI for battery. On the one hand, battery manufacturers were clearly focusing on battery technologies for ESS designed to support AI data centers. This was one of the most visible trends across the exhibition floor. At the same time, I also saw many companies highlighting how they are using AI within their own battery development and manufacturing processes. There were a wide range of AI-driven solutions on display, including AI-based battery diagnostics, technologies that analyze production data to reduce defect rates, and tools that use AI to identify optimal material compositions and cell designs. Reflecting this broader trend, there was also a noticeable increase in companies showcasing AI-based manufacturing and R&D solutions. A good example was LG CNS, one of the LG Group, an IT service provider, which participated in InterBattery for the first time this year. The company's view was that as AI can significantly improve productivity across battery R&D and manufacturing, this was the right moment to demonstrate its in-house capabilities and expertise both to the battery industry and to the wider market.
Right. Can you also tell us about the participants' focus on non-EV related battery applications at InterBattery this year?
Yes, as I mentioned earlier, this year's exhibition featured a much broader range of non-EV battery applications. In that sense, LG Chem's long-standing slogan, Beyond EV, felt particularly appropriate for InterBattery this year. All three major Korean battery companies placed strong emphasis on batteries and packaging solution for ESS. In particular, LG Energy Solution showcased what felt like an almost limitless range of industries that batteries could enable, including applications for robot, drones, and even aerospace and satellite technologies. Samsung SDI, meanwhile, highlighted solutions for micromobility and power tools, further underlining the shift away from the purely EV-centric focus. One additional point worth noting was the growing discussion around defense-related battery technologies. This year's event also featured the Korea-US Defense Battery Corporation seminar, signaling that interest in specialized and strategic battery applications is clearly expanding beyond the civilian sector.
Right, that's very interesting. There's also a sudden move by the Korean manufacturers to divert capacity to produce battery energy storage systems. This is already happening in the US, and we were taking a look at some of the announcements made by LG Energy, Samsung, as well as SK On, because these companies they had some big joint ventures with the car manufacturers in the US. Now, LG Energy has already showcased its energy storage solution at the InterBattery 2026, and this does hint that battery makers are seriously looking at the ESS space. Do you see similar capacity diversion to ESS space in Korea as well? What is your perspective on this?
In the US, the situation is being shaped by two trends happening at the same time. While the electric vehicle market has been slowing down, demand from AI data centers has been growing very rapidly. As a result, US battery plants have quite fortunately been able to redirect capacity from EV batteries towards ESS. This has helped cushion the impact of the slowdown in EV demand. However, Korea presents a slightly different picture. Under the new government, there is a strong policy push to raise EV adoption to 50% by 2030. And this is happening alongside government lead tenders in the central ESS procurement market. Taken together, These factors are helping to keep the domestic market relatively active. So instead of the extreme shift of EV battery capacity into ESS that we are seeing in the US, I expect Korea to move toward a more balanced mixed production model in which EV and ESS batteries are produced in parallel.
Oh, that's a very interesting take. So, if Korea is looking at increasing the EV adoption to 50% by 2030, what's happening in the US is quite contradictory because last year, as you know, the consumer incentives sort of expired and they were not renewed by the Trump administration. I also hear that there's an increasing focus on the commercialization of solid state battery in South Korea. And when we talk of batteries, we don't talk of solid state battery. That basically puts the conversation incomplete. There's a lot of pressing need, a lot of automotive manufacturers, battery suppliers, everybody is basically focusing a lot on solid state. In Korea, we see LG Energy, Samsung, as well as SK On. They've been already demonstrating their prototypes at the previous editions of InterBattery. We see material suppliers beginning to move the needle this year. John, can you please elaborate on the latest disclosures made by the suppliers such as POSCO EcoPro? Can you please elaborate?
Yeah, sure. As solid-state battery development progresses, securing a reliable supply chain becomes absolutely critical for mass production. That's why OEMs and cell manufacturers are now working much more closely with material suppliers. No matter how advanced a technology may be, large-scale production simply isn't possible without a properly established such supply chain. Among Korea companies, Samsung SDI has been one of the most proactive player when it comes to all solid-state battery. One detail that really caught my attention at this year's exhibition was that the all solid-state battery was showcased not for EV, but for humanoid robot. Up until last year, Samsung SDI had been presenting a roadmap that pointed to mass production of all solid-state batteries for EVs in the second half of 2027. At this year's event, however, the all solid state battery was displayed more discreetly, and the title had changed to indicate mass production for humanoid in the second half of 2027. LG Energy Solution made a similar statement through its exhibition layout by positioning its solid-state batteries primarily within robot-related applications. Taken together, this suggests that there are still clear limitations when it comes to producing all solid-state batteries at the size and scale required for EV. For now, smaller and more specialized applications appears to be more realistic starting point.
So smaller applications for solid state batteries to begin with. Great. While solid state batteries, so to say, represent the premium end of the battery spectrum, lithium iron phosphate or LFP chemistry is somewhat seen at the affordable end. Can you explain in detail the progress that's made by the Korean battery manufacturers on the LFP front? There's visibly a lot of pressure on the Korean battery suppliers when it comes to the competition from their Chinese counterparts on the production and supply capabilities of LFP batteries. And at the same time, I see that there's a big global affordable LFP battery market that's waiting to be tapped, but the Korean companies don't have the capacity to supply at the moment. What do you have to say on this, John?
Historically, China has focused heavily on LFP batteries for EVs, while Korean battery manufacturers have concentrated more on NCM or NCA-based chemistries. However, when it comes to ESS, LFP is generally regarded as the more suitable option, thanks to its longer cycle life and lower cost. This is one of the key reasons why Chinese suppliers currently dominate the global ESS battery market. In contrast, LFP production in Korea is still at a relatively early stage. Mass production only began fairly recently, and so far, LFP batteries from Korean suppliers are being considered almost exclusive for ESS applications rather than for electric vehicles. What Korean companies are effectively trying to do is take advantages of a temporary window created by policy changes with regulations such as the US IRA and Europe's CRMA and IAA. Chinese-made batteries are facing tariffs and subsidy restrictions in the US and Europe. During this gap, companies Koreans are moving quickly to build LFP production lines and target niche opportunities in the global market. This effort is not limited to cell manufacture alone. Following LNF, which was the first Korean company to enter the LFP cathode business, material suppliers such as EcoPro and POSCO Futuram are also in the process of establishing mass production lines for LFP cathode materials. Looking further ahead, I also expect that LFP technologies initially developed for ESS will eventually find their way into electric vehicle applications as well. After all, companies need to make the most of the technologies they developed and production equipment they invested in.
That's right, I agree there. I recall that in the last year's podcast, you noted a significant increase in the participation by Chinese companies. May I ask whether their influence remains strong this year as well?
Yes, last year I mentioned that we had seen a significant increase in participant from Chinese companies, and that overall trend certainly continued this year. In fact, one particular symbol moment at InterBattery 2026 was that the first overseas company to win an InterBattery award was a Chinese firm, Wuxi Lead Intelligence Equipment. The lead is one of China's leading battery manufacturing equipment suppliers, and it received the award for its dry electrode mixing and dry electrode coating equipment. Historically, Chinese equipment makers uh, competed largely on price, but now they are combining cost competitiveness with increasingly creative and advanced manufacturing technologies and are actively targeting Korean battery manufacturers. Beyond the lead, several other Chinese companies include Hanko Technology, Lyric Robot, and Himson Laser also participate in this year's exhibition. It is also widely understood that since last year's InterBattery, Korean battery cell suppliers have been increasing their adoption of Chinese production equipment, reflecting this shift in capability and competitiveness.
That's very interesting. I believe that battery manufacturing equipment lately is gaining a lot of attention. And if I'm able to read the trend correctly, I believe as several companies, including battery makers as well as car makers, are looking to scale up the production of solid state battery cells from early prototypes. They are also exploring the right kind of sophisticated equipment and methodologies that can help them address the gaps that exist today. Am I correct? Can you please elaborate more on this, John?
As you pointed out, there were certainly a number of Chinese equipment manufacturers emphasizing their solid-state battery capabilities at the exhibitions. However, if we look at the overall picture this year, the exhibition appeared to place even greater emphasis on equipment for ESS. ESS applications predominantly rely on LFP battery, as I mentioned. and Korean battery manufacturers are now in the process of reconfiguring their production lines to accommodate LFP-specific manufacturing requirements. This is where Chinese equipment suppliers have a clear advantage. Having accumulated extensive experience in LFP production, their equipment solutions can be particularly compelling for Korean manufacturers looking to scale up quickly. As a result, while solid-state technology remains an important longer-term focus, ESS-oriented equipment, especially for LFP, emerged as one of the most practical and commercial relevant themes at InterBattery 2026.
Oh, that's a great observation, John. I think this was a very interesting conversation. A lot we learned from my colleague on what was displayed and showcased at the InterBattery 2026. We've got multiple battery chemistries, non EV applications, solid state for humanoid robots, sodium ion, alternate chemistries, a lot of battery manufacturing equipment, energy storage solutions, and the list goes on. I can go on as there's so much more to cover on the event this year, but unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for today's episode. A big thank you to you, John, for taking out time from your busy schedule.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on the podcast. Thank you.
And thank you to all you listeners for tuning in as well. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode at our email, that is autology@spglobal.com. And you can find out much more at autotechinsight.ihsmarket.com. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe, follow, and like buttons to stay on track with the latest Autology podcasts. And we look forward to you joining us again in the next episode. Bye for now.